All right. Hello, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us for today's Smithsonian Social Studies online webcast. Today, we are going to be talking about an incredibly important conversation and question, both in social studies, but also really just something we often think about every day and has been coming up a lot during this current time. This question being, what is our moral obligation during times of crisis? So I'm so excited to hear this conversation between Orlando and Patty that we are about to have. But first, before I hand it over to them, just wanted to share a couple of things to keep in mind as you're engaging and participating in this webcast. You can ask questions at any time using the chat box to the right. Please remember, though, to not add any sort of personal or private information. That's yours. We want you to keep it. We don't need it. And also, if you are a parent or a teacher watching this webcast with your student or your child, we really encourage you to join in and participate fully with them. We encourage all questions, whether it's about this topic or about museum practice in general. And we're excited that you all are here to join us for a great conversation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Orlando.
All right. Thank you very much, Abby. And for folks who are with us today, thanks for joining us as we have a 30-minute conversation or so about this question, what is our moral responsibility during a time of crisis? And, Abby introduced herself. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Rolando Serrano. I am the manager for youth and teacher programs at the National Museum of American History. And it is great to be with you today. And it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Patty Arteaga. Patty, could you let us know a little bit about yourself? What is the work that you do at American History? What's a typical day like for you? And what are some of the projects that you're working on right now?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me both and inviting me to kind of grapple with this very easy question, which is not. So I'm a curatorial assistant at American History, and my particular role is looking at undocumented organizing in the past 20 years, particularly in our division of political history. So a typical day can look like answering emails, making sure that I'm well informed on the ongoing movement and kind of the side conversations that are always happening. So reading, researching. I also look through our objects that we already have in our collection, particularly about past social movements, and look at what we have and at what we don't have, because that informs how I move forward, and not only to look at what we can collect now, but how those multiple stories kind of are interwoven with the genealogy and the traditions of past social movements.
That's great. And, folks will see in us in a little bit, the idea of bridging previous moments in history with a contemporary moment, with some of the cultural resources that you did bring to share with us today. But before we start looking at some of those, I do want to remind folks, take some time, ask some questions as we show you some of these cultural resources. If you'd like to know more, please go ahead and enter them in the chat box. And before we jump in, Pati, can you say a little bit about how your current work on undocumented organizing in the United States, how it informs your question that we're discussing today?
Yeah, so I look through my framework of people who are usually not thought of as exercising power. So in this, particular community that we see as not having power because they don't have the power to vote or don't claim citizenship. But in reverse, I see that as people who actually are exercising their own form of power, right? Of making sure their voices are heard, besides that kind of normative structure. So kind of going outside and making sure that their own voices, how they influence politics, right? It's still kind of interjecting. So that is how I come at this, not only question, but my work, right? It's very community centric because it's very much at the grassroots level. It's seeing how every person has a role, intergenerational, any voice, right? And the complications that come with that. So, just kind of challenging where power lays that's always my framework.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get to our first cultural resource here. Now, for those who are with us, if we look a little bit closer, we can see that, as Bati mentioned, we are going to make some connections between the past and the present moment. And we're starting off here with a Black Panther Party flyer, it looks like, from the year 1972, right here. We can look this up right here if we analyze this object a little bit. Can you tell us about this program and, why we're starting here?
Yes, so we're starting here with a Black Panther flyer. And for just a quick background, it's a revolutionary political organization that began in the late 1960s as a way to address the maltreatment of African Americans in their own manner, right? And so here we have some very prominent activists. I mean, just a well-known person, Angela Davis. So we have this kind of advertising of attraction of who's going to be at this kind of 3-day conference of survival, right? It's a survival conference. But I would like to point in at the top, right? It says 10,000 free bags of groceries. So very highlighted, right, in red. And that, when we look at the whole survival context, like, you're not only looking at like the basic necessities of people, right? You're feeding them, but below that, you're also offering some sort of like nourishment of life, right? Of living. It's not just existing. So you're getting them in the whole spectrum of what it means to be a part of a community when a government or a larger entity has forgotten about you or ignored you or ignored your needs. Black Panther Party really, the images that predominate are very aggressive and militant. But there's here in the flyer are also showcasing like a counter narrative of we're providing a basic necessity, which is food and groceries to feed your family, So you also see just more prominent folks that are going to be in attendance.
Now, Bati, I know, thank you for rightly pointing out the emphasis on the free bags of groceries, on the idea and the importance of community survival and Black community survival. So in thinking about the work of the Black Panther Party for self-defense, right, which is often the little suffix that is left off, and if we think about the Black Panther Party for self-defense, the importance of survival definitely comes to the fore again. But I do have a question. Is the work of the Black Panther Party, was it all about survival, or were there other kinds of connotations? You got a little bit, when we started talking about this at our introduction, you said a little bit about how, it's community centric. So what are some of the other values that this particular community emphasized aside from survival?
Oh, no, thank you for that. Right. It's not just only about kind of being of people struggling and needing others to help. It's also just about self-determination, and that that will, whatever you have in your means, for you to be compelled to do something, right? The question here that is a through line throughout this session, right, is what is our moral obligation? But what I see is not necessarily like a compass leading it. Is if we translate that, I think about it like, what can I do to help, right? How can I help others so they can help themselves? They can, not only just survive, but thrive, right? And so this survival conference also had, legal clinics, programs for entrepreneurs, right? Just not only about the crises and the issues that face the community, but also the joy and the aspect that you need, right? In terms to survive, right? Because you need something to look forward to. And so, it's just not your stories of woe, it's your stories of excellence and of joy.
That's, thank you for adding some more of that context and that texture, that it is not just about survival, but the idea of bringing in these other clinics, during a time of crisis when clearly the Black community in the United States, in this case particularly Oakland, felt a sense of needing to respond, to defend itself. It went beyond just surviving, like you're saying. It went at empowerment.
Yeah.
And here on this tile, this is definitely a very striking image to help us get a sense for what 10,000 bags of groceries looks like. And, you know, can you say a little bit more about young people at this conference? You know, these are not adults. These are, you know, if I'm putting on my parent glasses, these are probably third and fourth graders, right? So what was the role of young people at this conference?
Yes. So I think everyone had a role to play, and especially the young ones. They saw whether or not their families were members or attendants to the survival conference. So this particular picture was taken at the survival conference. That everyone could participate, right? Everyone, in a way, can also see what was happening and want to, participate at their own capacity and level. So, you know, whether it was bagging the groceries, distributing them, and also just something we haven't mentioned, but the free breakfast program, right? So since the beginning, kind of the initiation of the party, youth have been at the center not only to receive the breakfast, which was before they would go to school, you know, the nourishment to have like a successful day and to learn. So you started off with youth, and you continuously incorporate them in whatever they can. And you know, one thing that they can do is you give them a task, and with each bag fill in groceries within a bag. So yes, it's a very intergenerational, and that gets back to the point of survival, right? If you want, not only as like a political not only as a like political party, but also just as a community. You know, they always say you got to start them young, but you have to involve them so they can see and come to that awareness, you know, much earlier than some folks do.
Yeah, you know, and this is, I mean, a couple of, you know, definitely ties to our contemporary moment. I know that, you know, living here in DC, you know, public school parent, I've gotten lots of emails from the chancellor talking about, you know, where folks can go and pick up lunches, you know. So there is definitely a sense of continuity between the work that, you know, we saw modeled by the BPP in the 1960s and where we are today. And also, I mean, quite frankly, you know, in reading news articles or seeing video updates of folks going to get food at pantries right now, right? This is such a striking through line to the moment that we're living in right now. Now, we are going to start to transition to some of the, you know, cultural resources that are tied to the work that you're doing right now. But as we do, can you please, you know, say a little bit about why you wanted to start with the Black Panther Party before moving on to undocumented organizing?
Yeah, so I wanted to start with a well-known social movement and kind of a very complicated one, one that's kind of highlighted with, as briefly mentioned, with aggression, but with also, you know, kind of long ignored programs that they facilitated. So at the very core, you know, social movements are very complex, and also just the intergenerational part that we already brought in. But when you come into and then you find out more about crises and issues and you know, it first began for the maltreatment of African Americans by police brutality, right? But then it just opened up into so much more. It broadened it up because they saw that one crisis here is interrelated with other crises over here. So, you know, if we can all kind of band together, you know, with numbers, we're stronger, and with more of not intellectual curiosity, but also a more informed citizen of how other people live, right? And so that's why I kind of really wanted to start with them, because not only with this very complexity and understanding about, you know, what affects their community, but also filling in the aid and the help wherever they saw fit, or wherever they saw it needed, which is what I'm seeing with kind of the contemporary movements that we're studying now and collecting today. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the background and for the introduction. I do want to pause for a second, folks. If you have any questions, again, go ahead and write them in the chat box. We will get to them. Abby will make sure that we get to them. She will not let us skip over or gloss them over. And as we look at our first,
well, hold on, Rolando. We actually do have a question, and I'd love to take a moment to talk about it. So I'll put it up on the screen and read it as well. It says, it's a question for Patti. How does the museum decide what or how to collect during these important events in our nation's history? And how do you decide whose stories and from whose perspectives you'll tell those stories? Tough one.
Okay. So
it's a lot to
team
unpack.
effort. Yeah. Yes, it is a lot. Do we have an hour? No, I'm just kidding. So, Eden, it's a team effort for a museum to decide. So I mentioned that I look at our collections already to see kind of the multiple stories that we already have. And then so from there, we've already identified, again, not only the gaps, but what really is missing from our national narrative. What are some things that we just haven't been able to fully tell because either, we tell stories through objects, or as Orlando and I have been trying to say, more cultural resources. That's how we tell stories. That is our entry point. And when we don't have that, then we can either really be creative, or seek what can best tell that story, not only to fill a gap, but also just complicate more the narrative. So it's a very complicated question. It's very ongoing, but thank you for asking it. And if I miss something, I can answer it later.
Thank you, Patti. Right. And before you move on, we do have one more. And I know we have quite a few cultural resources, but it's just so wonderful to have questions. So this one, in looking back on this important history, what resonates with you about our many crises today? And what takeaways are easily actionable today?
Oh, thank you, Andrea, for that one. What resonates the most with me is just folks' resiliency. And that's not to say that it's just people going forward when there's somehow a wall or something blocking you, and people find a way. It's that in that creative agency that people all throughout history that I'm seeing is just to move forward. That is what gives me life, and that is what I see, and that's what most fascinates me about history. Is just like when folks have been told a no, they just find another way to go through it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Patti. Thank you for your questions, folks. Now, we have here a poster, and we're getting really into the undocumented organizing initiative that you're currently working on. Can you please tell us what we're looking at here? When we got to this tile at the very beginning, it said, "I'm here for my student Dennis." So could you please let us know who Dennis is, first of all, and then what's the story behind this cultural resource?
Yeah, so can you actually go, so there's two sides to this poster. If you can go to the next one, I think that one's a little, it tells you a little bit more about,
Hold on, let me click on the, maybe the information will say a little bit more.
The images, at the bottom it says one out of two images.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so this poster, as we saw, is from kind of a mass-produced poster that are usually passed in demonstrations. And this one in particular was collected on March 5th of 2018. And that's an important date because that was the 6-month deadline after DACA was rescinded in September 5th of 2017. And that deadline was for Congress to act and pass a DREAM Act, which is the only pathway for legalizations for many undocumented youth. But, the date came and went and nothing occurred. And so people gathered and started from the White House all the way walking to the Capitol building. And some of the curators at the museum went and saw this and collected it for our collections. And for this one, I'm here for my student Dennis, who's being detained. Here we see, again, just like a popular poster, but it's a personalized message it's actually of their teacher, right? And we see it's from Houston, Texas. So what on earth were they doing in DC? Was it just out of sheer will because he felt compelled to do something, or for other reason he was in DC and participating in this demonstration with people who were kind of like-minded, were feeling kind of devastated that again their lives are in limbo. But as a teacher, he just felt the need to kind of raise awareness that youth were being detained by ICE, and one of them was being his student. So there was a campaign all around Free Dennis, who's a student who was detained. Sorry.
Well, no. I was just gonna to add to what you're saying, Pati, that it seems like what the lesson we can learn from what this teacher in this instance is doing is that one of the things that we can do, one of our responsibilities is to stand with people during times of crisis, right? I mean, or stand in for people when someone cannot stand there themselves.
Yeah, very, very true. And sometimes we don't know what to do. So all that we can do is just either go to a demonstration or just say, even without words, just writing it down, like, I'm with you. And for many, that's what drives them to address a crisis. The feeling of like, I don't know what to do, but here's something I can do.
Okay. Well, what we're gonna move on to our next tile here, and can you please let us know a little bit about what is going on here?
Yeah. So in the image, we see Jose Centeno Melendez, who is our oral historian for our project, and he's speaking with Serrano, who's an undocumented organizer out of North Carolina. And what we're seeing here is kind of an oral history recording in process, and you get to see a little bit more about how we work as a team. So we're in constant communication with people. We're really about relationship building. Because not only in addressing museum collections, we don't necessarily have these stories, but we also have to work as a museum to let people know that they not only can trust us, but that whatever they record, whatever they donate is going to be entrusted, and it's going to be of aid to the public to kind of demonstrate a very kind of complicated but also very human story in our collections, right? So here we have. We're recording, at his house, and it's okay. I love it.
So we see the tools of the trade here. Eden, your question earlier in terms of how how do folks decide to collect? But it sounds like maybe another response during a time of crisis is to document, to make sure that this is happening, right? So that folks understand that what is happening in live time, and earlier on, you said that it's very important to notice gaps and to see where there are pieces that are missing. And it looks like we've got a really, in process image here of that going on, right? Doing the moral work of documenting what is happening, responses too,
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate thing is that we can, no collection can ever be comprehensive. But what we do is kind of within the gaps, we say like, okay, what can we best do to not only fill it, but complicate the narrative, as I've mentioned before. But there is a kind of awesomeness, for lack of a better word, of like being able to contemporary collect and record people as they're kind of working and organizing as a movement. It has its complications, right? Things are constantly changing, but to be able to sit down, like how are you viewing yourself at this moment, and to be able to capture that is something so powerful and special, especially for a museum to to kind of capture that at the moment right now.
Well, let's listen in, if you will, to this conversation just a little bit, and hear, some of Moises's thoughts. And he said at some point, finding an alternate ID outside of the Mexican consulate with a photo was an incredibly difficult task. If a library, for example, or other organization did issue an identification card, it was rarely with a picture. Having been pulled over and knowing and hearing stories of many others, we all knew that we needed an ID with a photo identification on it. This is why when I heard the Latino Credit Union was issuing identification cards and bank cards with your picture on it, many of us went to open bank accounts with them. I still have $10 in a savings account with them to this day. So let's talk a little bit about, what Moises is saying here and the role of the Latino Credit Union. What is the work that this organization is doing for its community? What does this building represent, for this community in a moment of crisis?
Yeah, so this building really saw a need with the changing demographics of the South, especially in North Carolina. There was more Latino people, and so a credit union, right, is a kind of cooperative where its members can borrow money from pooled deposits at low interest rates, but they saw a need of kind of a presence of a financial structure to provide to their community where either a lack of social security, as we see with Moises's comment of like that was very difficult for him because he didn't have a sort of ID. He couldn't open a bank account. So this kind of, again, filled in the gap where and filled the need where there wasn't any before to provide some sort of financial security and a structure for people. In a new place.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Two things I'm hearing you say. One, the way in which this organization, the credit union, is very much able to support the life of this community. Through loans, through having a bank account, but also by doing the simple work of proving one's existence, it seems like, right? Where Moises needed something with his picture on it and he wasn't able to get it, and these folks provided that for them.
Yeah, and we don't really necessarily think about the importance of having your picture with your name on a piece of plastic, but for those who need it or rely on it the most, or have had situations where you cannot prove your existence, I think that's the hyper awareness that this is important, right? And for those who have never had situations, it seems like just another card to carry, but for others, it proves unfortunately your personhood in our society. Whether or not the cooperative knew what they were doing, it still provided kind of a lifeline for many. Not just undocumented folks. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to duck into another conversation that you all have had. And thank you, by the way, for sharing some of your work in progress. I know that's, both sensitive and a little bit vulnerable to share what you're doing as you're doing it. So thank you very much. And we have here a quote from another organizer. At this point, I think I'm still grappling with what does it mean to be an immigrant, and what does it mean to be an immigrant specifically to my own personal story. I remember going to these meetings and there's like 30 or 40 of us and we're all the same age. We're listening to people our very same age talk to us and update us on what's happening with the DREAM Act or what's happening with tuition equity, but also being introduced to LGBTQ rights and all these things that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to be exposed to. I just knew that was a space that I wanted to be in and know more about. And then Stefania continues, it went from, all right, let's make 287G a point of conversation because people have tried before in the past 12 years, it has been a place to, okay, let's write a demand letter, making sure that people and organizations can sign, elected officials, influential people. It got so much traction that there were 3 candidates, the incumbent and 2 others. The 2 people that were running signed the letter saying that they wanted Sheriff Carmichael to get rid of 287G. So, we're getting close to the end of our time together here, Pati, but there are a couple of questions that come to mind. First, can you provide a little bit of context for folks who may not know what 287G is in North Carolina. And then we'll get to Stefania's comments in a little bit. But let's start with 287G.
Yes, thank you for that reading. I can hear her voice when you're reading the transcript of her oral history, so thank you for that. But 287G is a voluntary agreement between local police and the federal government. What that really means is that the state police can act as federal agents or like immigration agents, sorry. Yeah, so when we think of just immigration agents, it's not only at the border, but it's also in the interior. So if someone gets arrested or detained, then if they go into, if they get booked, then, if they're not a citizen, then they can be turned over to ICE. And that can put them in a deportation pipeline. So what Stefania is mentioning is that there would be checkpoints all throughout her community that she was seeing, right? She was working on this federal campaign for the DREAM Act, but then was seeing something hitting so close to her and not only affecting her community, but so many others at a more everyday instance. So that's when she kind of turned her focus more on like, what can I, within my power, I live in this community, I know this is something that's affecting us so much. So let me put my whole heart and soul into it.
Thank you for providing that backdrop for us and what 287G is and how Stefania decided to sort of turn her attention more towards what was happening in her very own community. And as we're starting to wrap up here, I'd like to sort of ask you a little bit about some of the comments that she mentioned. And what stood out to me is the fact that she said, I came here to talk about this, but when I got to this space and I did the work of standing with people, I started to hear about other issues, right? I started to hear about, LGBTQ rights, and I wouldn't have heard about that otherwise. And, so it's a very, very well-crafted narrative of Tiles, because it seems like we're back to where we started with the BPP and the sort of coming together of lots of different issues, when we start to do some investigative work. So my last question for you is, what can we learn from Stefania's, observations about what happens when we look at one crisis? What can we learn from that? And how can we, apply that lens and think about that learning process with other crises as they occur, like the one that we're living in now?
Yeah, so with any crisis, it's never one single issue. It's never just a one kind of narrow pathway. And so with any introduction, with any involvement in trying to help in any way in a crisis, you see that there are so many others fighting the same fight. So many others trying to get to the same kind of destination. And so what we have learned from her comment and just through many other social movements is to kind of complicate it, but also, one person's liberation can be for all liberation, right? It can be one person's like better or achievement of better rights can be for all. It doesn't necessarily have to pertain to just one community, right? When all people can benefit from just a better effort, a truer meaning of living in the United States during many, many crises. Yeah.
Thank you, Pati, and thank you for bringing these cultural resources to our attention, to talking with us about them. And for those who are interested, and as I've been making my notes here, what I've learned are some of the things that we can do, some of our responsibilities to help or to, be active during times of crisis, is stand with people, pool resources together, and learn, right? And the act of learning is very powerful, and as Pati pointed out, can help us see that one particular crisis is often tied to another crisis, and we're seeing for instance that leads me to think about now we've got a public health crisis and an economic crisis going on. How are these two tied together? These are definitely questions that are at the top of my mind that I can go and learn about. All right, well, folks, we are just about at time. if anyone has a last minute question or so, we can get to them. But I do want to let you all know that we have resources available here. This Learning Lab collection will live in the comments. You can get to it later on if you would like. And when you go there, you will see lots of Learning Lab collections about several of the different topics that we have been covering over the last few weeks. Abby, is there anything that I missed that we need to make sure and address before we sign off?
No, I'm happy to give a little bit of information just to wrap us up. But Pati, one more question for you before we go. And if you could just do this as, a quick one. How can students access some of the museum's oral histories that you have collected? And any tips for students who want to conduct their own oral histories?
Yes, so we are in the process of transcribing our oral history. So when they become available, I can let the education team know to kind of provide an easier access. But yeah, it's kind of a long process to make sure everything is good to go. And then the second question I forgot was
I'll put it back. Any quick tips for students who want to conduct their own?
You have a phone, easily to record, but really answer what you're trying to get at. What is it about that you want to learn more? And to really the act of oral history is listening to the other person. So what would you like to know more? And just press record.
Thank you, Pati. That's wonderful. I want to echo Orlando and say thank you for sharing this incredibly important history and topic and helping us examine this question. I'm also excited that at 12 p.m. Eastern, so in 24 minutes, we'll be looking at this question again, but in Spanish with your colleague, Jose. And so if any of you want to join us for that session, we certainly welcome you. Please also feel free to let others know if you have someone in mind who speaks Spanish or is learning Spanish or just simply wants to see another take on this. We encourage you to join us. And yes, as Orlando said, all of these resources are available to you in a Learning Lab collection at this, there we go, at this link here. So you can find this resources and you can find a lot of different resources about this question through different lenses and moments in history. So we want to thank you all so much for your questions, for being here. We hope you'll join us next week as well. Our topic on April 30th is going to be, who are we the people? And we'll be joined by other curators from the National Museum of American History. So thank you. Have a great day. We hope you stay safe and well. We'll see you again soon.
Stay safe, folks.
Bye, everyone.